Hello there, people of the internet. I've been wanting to get these two rifles side by side for quite some time. This is the first time I've actually stuck these rifles together like this and really had the chance to go ahead and look over them and check them out and see what the differences are between the two. I recently just picked up this No1Mk3. If you haven't seen my video on this, I got this from Royal Tiger Imports. I recommend going and checking that out. This right here is a No4Mk1 rifle, or yeah, No4Mk1, but there's Mark II features with it, but for all intents and purposes, it's a Mark I that's been updated. This rifle here is a 1943 production versus the No1, which is a 1917 production. We got a World War I era rifle and a World War II era rifle. I wanted to go ahead, stick these side by side, check them out, see what I could and could not find with them. And I figured I'd go ahead and record while I go ahead and do that. So first off, I'm going to say the finish on the metal on the No1, since this is from Ethiopia, is pretty much gone. So the metal's in the white. That's normally not like that. That would normally be finished much like the metal on the No4 series. I'm also going to point out that the strap on the No4 is not an accurate strap at all. It's actually a guitar strap that I tied onto this thing, so I had a strap to lug it around with. Okay, so where do we start? 1906, the British adopt this rifle right here. Very good rifle, based a lot off the Lee Metford, but with different rifling in the barrel. But we're not going to get into that subject, but that's a good idea for a future video. They used this rifle in the First World War and into the Second World War. However, in the Second World War, Britain was, burning to the ground thanks to the Germans and their blitzkrieg tactics. And the British were like, we need a cheaper, faster to manufacture rifle that is easier to produce and that we can get, more rifles in the hands of our soldiers at a faster rate. They didn't want to sacrifice the safety or quality or functionality of the rifles. As a result, this rifle right here was not necessarily made, because this was originally the No1Mk6 that was redesignated as the No1Mk4, or No4Mk1. There we go, I mixed that up a bit. I apologize if I mixed that up. The No1Mk6 became the No4Mk1. It's a far easier, cheaper, simpler to manufacture rifle, and we'll go ahead and go over all the reasons why, well, at least most of the reasons why, whenever we start looking at these things together. So the first thing I notice in comparing these rifles, the actions are basically identical. They each have a rear locking system. However, the actual rail system that the bolt travels in for the No4 is on the inside of the receiver versus the rail system on the No1, which is on the outside of the receiver. There would protect the rail system from all sorts of funk and gunk and various debris and leavings that would, encounter these rifles on the battlefield. I'm also noticing that the cocking pieces on these things are different. I imagine that the cocking piece of this design is easier and cheaper to manufacture than the cocking piece of this design. And a lot of the surfaces on the No4 are just flat, square surfaces, as opposed to the finely machined, rounded surfaces of the receiver of the No1. Now the magazines are different, the magazine catches are different, the magazine designs themselves look pretty similar, other than the fact that they load into the rifle differently. I'm also noticing that the bolt on the No4 has this little hole in the bolt handle, probably to reduce weight or something, as opposed to no hole in the No3. On the bolt of the No4 series, I call that No3, the No1, the bolt on the No4 series has this cutout groove right here on the locking surface. Could be to reduce weight. If I had to make a guess, I'd say that's probably what that is. And that is not apparent on the bolt of the No1 series. This one right here is a little heavier than this one here, but not by much. Although I can't really show it off on camera, I'll have to just kind of explain it. The triggers on these, this No1 has like It almost feels like a one-stage trigger, much like a Mosin's. You just pull it back and you never really know whenever it's going to go off. The number 4 series here actually has what feels like a 2-stage trigger. A little bit of creep in it, but then a very clear wall where you break through that sear and it fires the rifle. As a result, I'm sure that I could be more accurate with the number 4 than I could the number 1. The number 1 has leaf sights on it, which doesn't have as large of a sight radius as I would expect. I don't understand why the sight radius for these rifles were made to be so short. Why didn't they take the rear sight and stick it back here onto the receiver? That's just me asking myself. There's obviously no answer that you guys could come up with, but that's just one of the things that I think about whenever I look at this thing. Sight radius is incredibly short compared to the sight radius on the number 4, where they did in fact put the rear sight at the very back of the receiver. Now, the biggest difference in the rear sights between these two, besides the distance and the sight radius, the number 4 rifles have an aperture sight, as did the number 5s, the jungle carbines, the Ishapur rifles, things like that. Nope, the Ishapur rifles had a leaf sight on them. So the number 4s and the jungle carbines, those had the aperture sights on them, versus the number 1 series, which had a leaf sight on them. Personally, I prefer the aperture sight over the leaf sight just because it's easier for me to use, especially with the leaf sight being at the distance it is on this rifle. I'm kind of blind. I like the sight being right up next to my eye so I can see it easy, but that's just me. To take the bolt out of these rifles, the number 1 is definitely far easier. In order to disassemble the bolt, or not disassemble the bolt, to remove the bolt from this rifle, you have to press down this tab, pull it back, lift it up. Well, I'm trying to show this off and explain it in layman's terms. And pull it out. That little tab right there is what pulls it out of the rail system right there on the inside of the receiver. And in order to put it back, this is one of those things that kind of, it's not a comfortable or easy system to pull this thing out, because you need this extra tab and then you need your third hand to reliably and comfortably remove that bolt, versus the number 1 series, which has the rail on the outside of the rifle, and all you have to do is that same tab. There's no little tab to press. You just lift this up and then it comes right out of the gun. Obviously these bolts are not interchangeable because one rides on an internal rail and the other rides on the external rail. The receiver itself, very simple in comparison to the number 1, especially around the charger guide. The charger guide's not a separate piece that's mounted onto the receiver. It's a part of the receiver itself. That is interesting. I don't know if it's all rifles like this, but this particular number 4 has the date stamp on the left side of the receiver band versus the number 1, which has the date stamp on the right side under the bolts. Interesting comparison. Now, obviously, the biggest distinctive difference is the what people call bulldog nose cap on the number 1 versus the much more rifle-looking nose cap on the number 4. In terms of what I think of when I think of a barrel coming out of a stock on a rifle, I think of being able to see at least a little bit of the barrel, which is something that doesn't happen with the number 1. The barrel's flush with a nose cap. Very unique looking setup that they have there. Each of these holds 10 rounds of .303. Each of them is a cock-on close action. Each of them, I mean, they're both basically the same rifle with, well, the same rifle in terms of functionality. The main difference between these rifles was the ease of manufacture. With just how many different flat surfaces and easy machined parts there are on this receiver in comparison to the number 1, I could see definitely how this would be an easier to manufacture rifle than the number 1. Go ahead and check out the butt plate. Just for giggles. They're both brass butt plates. They look pretty much identical. They each have a little slot for a cleaning kit or some sort of storage area. I had pointed this out whenever I checked out the Ishapur and the number 1. The number 1 has this little pin right here in the back of the stock. And the number 4 has the same thing, but it's in a little divot. That's an interesting little tidbit that they got going on there. The safety on these things basically function exactly the same way. They're in the same location. They look very similar, but there are a little bit of a difference. That right there looks kind of like, it kind of looks like a makeshift aperture sight, looking at it like I am. I mean, if you think about it, you got your aperture sight right there. That could be like for 100 yards, and then a little bit above it, that little notch. Maybe they did like what the Thompson did, and maybe that's like 200 yards or something. Of course, that's just, you know, me joking around what it looks like. Whereas the number 1 kind of looks like the hammer for the back of a pistol. The upper hand guards on these things, the number 4 is clearly much, much stronger than the upper hand guard on the number 1. The number 1 has this very finicky upper hand guard right here that I'm certain is prone to breaking. Speaking of breaking, my voice just broke. I thought I got past puberty. I guess not. Now, normally on the number 4, you would have a sight that you could adjust out to, I'm sure, several thousand meters, but due to the wartime economy that the British were dealing with, they had to swap over to these cheap little aperture sights. In this particular case, I have an aperture sight with 2 different variables on it for 300 and 600 yards. I don't believe that the number 1 ever had such a simple sighting system installed. I could be wrong on that. I know the Italians with their M38s, I believe they were, they just put on a baseline 200 meter sight, got rid of their very advanced crazy sights, but I don't know about the number 1. I'll have to look that up. I don't have the bayonets with me. I have a bayonet for the number 4. The bayonet for the number 4 is basically just a spike bayonet, just to say that you have a bayonet, I guess. The bayonet for the number 1 was a blade-style bayonet, so far more intricately to make a blade-style bayonet than it is just to, you know, put a spike on the end of your rifle. So, besides that, these right here actually look extraordinarily similar. Where's the extractor? There's the extractor. Yep, it's on the same part of the gun. The ejector. Okay. Yeah, you can definitely tell that these are basically the same action. This right here is just obviously a much easier to produce version of the number 1. That is cool. Well, I've been wanting to sit down and check these out side by side like this for quite some time. Whenever this number 1's up and going, which right now it's not, I'm waiting for a special tool so I can take apart the bolts. I'd love to take these out onto the range. I'm probably going to make a video on that, comparing these 2 rifles. So, if you guys want to be a part of that, subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more, obviously. I do this kind of stuff all the time. Just military surplus is one of my favorite things to enjoy in this world. From Royal Tiger Imports, the wood on this is actually not bad at all, but I'm probably still going to shine it up a bit. Nah, probably not. I kind of like I mean, it's a rifle from 1917. I don't know what anyone's expecting. It's been sitting in Ethiopia for who the hell knows how many decades. Could have been a whole century for all I know. But subscribe to the channel for more, because I do this stuff all the time. If you like the video, do me a favor and actually like the video. That helps out with the algorithm. Down in the description below, you're going to find links to all sorts of stuff. Discord, Patreon, gaming channel, other stuff, social medias. I forget the rest. Okay, well, I have something cooking on the stove behind me. I'm sure it's been ready for several hours now. I'm slow cooking a roast. And boy, does it smell good. Anyway, I'd love to take these out to the range, but like I said, I'm just waiting on the tool. Should be here today. My patience has paid off. Should be here at some point, but it's not here yet. So, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find more 303 British ammo, actually. Thinking about it, I don't have much. And now that I have these rifles, I'm probably going to want to use them. Damn this ammo shortage and it being super expensive. Okay, well, I'm done rambling, I promise. You guys go off Have a fantastic day.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.